Today I would like to speak about something a bit different from the usual, meaning that it's more about history, at least from a disciplinary point of view, and more exactly about history tales or informations about some historical period. I want to talk about a discipline that is paleography. I'm not a paleographer. Let's say I never even wanted to be one, but as a medievalist in my university path, I met paleography many times, really, and one of my degrees actually contemplates paleography even in the title, so I'm not really the last person on earth um, in terms of knowledge of this discipline. And partly I really even worked as a paleographer when I had to prepare my exams and so on. And I thought that it would be interesting to talk about it from my personal experience. So not really, making a boring explanation about what the whole manual of paleography is really about, but really giving, a general understanding of this subject to those who do not know it, and possibly even giving some advice in the case you want to study it, if you think it's useful or not. Because there's plenty of disciplines out there that when you go to school you know basically nothing about. You probably have some hints that there are people who manage to do or that they are specialists at least in certain um, for reading a manuscript, like in this case for instance, but you don't suspect that there is a well structured discipline behind it if you have never heard about it or you've never got interested in it. So what is paleography, first of all? As the name says, from paleos and graphia, it literally means the discipline that studies ancient, let's say, or at least better, old writings. In actual fact, it's discipline is that makes you capable of reading most of all, um, and to decipherate ancient writings. Now, paleography is usually, however, something more limited in the sense that after printing, the problem of interpreting a text from a paleographical point of view ceases to exist in a certain way, because the characters are all alike, and it's more important maybe how the page is structured, and maybe it's more about codicology or diplomatic studies in that sense. But even if you find a letter, a handwritten letter, in modern or even contemporary times, even one that has been written yesterday, paleography enters into the play, meaning that paleography actually studies how the alphabet and the writing change over time, and it gives you hints about that hand who wrote it, and tries to get other informations from the writing itself. But as I was saying before, printing is really what paleography takes into consideration. There are various paleographies, meaning that I studied Latin paleography, that is basically the paleography of the whole Western world from ancient times to the early modern age. But there is also Greek paleography, or I don't know, Arab paleography. I think we also have in my university. Just to make you understand that theoretically speaking, paleography is about all the writings that are out there and can be possibly read. I remember some of my professors that were, when in their youth, so passionate about paleography. They wanted to really read every kind of alphabet that was out there, every kind of writing that had been written. So from the ancient Mesopotamian writings to the Chinese world and so on. Obviously, it's impossible because you understand that it's an extremely vast topic with a lot of different, because we all write in different ways and for different purposes, so it's impossible to cover the whole paleographical spectrum from a historical point of view. I studied Latin paleography, that is summed up usually in manuals as very in a very concise way for obvious reasons, from the very origins of the Latin writing. So we're talking about the Roman archaic era, um, to essentially the early modern age. So as I was saying, when the print was was invented, as and what is there in manuals out there? What is there that you really learn when you study paleography? Well, basically, it's a list of writings that is always, in this case, in Latin paleography, it's always the Latin alphabet, so the one that the Romans got from the Etruscans, more or less, and who in turn had got from the Greeks, and to the very end of humanistic writings, and throughout the whole Middle Ages and an ancient world, of course. And the skills that you are required when you are a paleographer is, as I said before, essentially to manage to read a writing. And you'd say, well, but more or less the Latin alphabet is the one that we still use today. So what is there that you should be learning about? If you find something that is written there, it's always the same letters that so it's very easy. Well, not really. I mean, if you read, I don't know, the Roman epigraphic writing that the Romans used to sculpt on the monuments, yeah, you have these neatly shaped squared letters that are the same we use today, and which were incidentally taken back in that form from the Renaissance, which was, trying to recover the classical past. But if you start reading, let's say, a cursive Latin writing of the 14th century, or even an early medieval Western manuscript, well, I can assure you that it's not really easy to read it. It's actually quite complicated. Mhm. And you need some knowledge, some skills that you necessarily get through paleography. It tells you, look, in this writing, we know that this letter is shaped in this way. This other letter links to the other in this way, and therefore, on the base of these reference points, throughout a lot of practice, a lot of reading, you should be able to recognize not only the letters but also essentially a type of writing from another. So you should be able to say, which age that writing dates back, or if that writing was used in a peculiar context, and so on. And I must say that I didn't have a very good relationship with paleography, meaning that especially the basic exam was a nightmare. All the exams I've done in paleography were quite big exams. But the first one was very tough because it was exactly about this, learning very mechanically, very very technically this writings, and therefore there was not much room for improvisation. I had studied a very few times, and it wasn't even a disaster, but I repeated it because, and it's one of my, telling the truth, one of my very few university defeats. I think it's only two, and therefore I kind of developed a certain antipathy for this subject because I thought it was very cold, and I said, because by the way, I was incredibly good at reading it. The problem though is that the professor asked me to express with my own words that were supposedly technical words you could find in manual, how to describe the shape of a letter in a particular writing. And I said, well, I don't know, there is this line that goes up here and then turns, and then the professor, I don't understand anything, you have no property of language, you don't know, you can recognize the writings, but you can't explain yourself properly. So I repeated the exam, and from that day I had a lot of prejudices towards this discipline, because I thought it was useful just for reading what was written, in a manuscript, let's say. And as a medievalist, obviously that was quite useful, but I still got, the idea that it was quite boring to go out there and find out new manuscripts when there are actual paleographers doing that, and writing down what is written in them, and then the historian reads in a normalized way, and then therefore I didn't like this paleography at all. But over time I did other exams of paleography that were mandatory because if I could, I would have avoided them. And also of codicology. Codicology is a very close discipline to paleography. We can't say that, in actual fact, paleographers are also codicologists and vice versa. What is codicology? Codicology is the studying of the manuscripts as archaeological sources, which means the paleographer reads the text, the codicologist studies how the manuscript is built up. And it's obvious that what is written on the manuscript often helps you to understand how the manuscript is built up, archaeologically speaking. Just think about the numbers on the pages, and think that I don't know, medieval manuscripts, there were a melange of various papers put together, and or maybe papers taken from other manuscripts and erased and used for writing on them on another manuscript. I mean, you find really a lot of variety in this sense. which incidentally, from a historical point of view, does correspond to lots of informations, because it might seem, banal to someone who never thought about it, but even from just a small sign and a small um, writing, or the way a paper is cut or put into the manuscript, you can understand a lot. You get a lot of informations, a lot of hints, and some of them are indeed of great historical interest. And I was saying that by getting in these exams of paleography and codicology and passing from the basic, technical knowledge of reading to a deeper and more varied understanding of these disciplines, I actually appreciated a lot paleography and understood really what was great about it. Because that first exam was just about learning how to read. mm. These second exams instead took into consideration lots of other aspects. Because what does a paleographer really do? The paleographer is not, a worker that gets there and is paid just to read the books. Normally, a paleographer does something very different, that he searches for certain manuscripts containing certain texts, or maybe manuscripts that were produced in a certain place, from a certain author, from a certain copyist, and trying to get new informations about a certain, a certain piece of literature, or about a certain copyist, or about a certain manuscript tradition, or in a certain way of, material production of these manuscripts. And I think it's extremely fascinating because, just to make you an example, think about how many classical works of antiquity we have only in form of medieval copies. A lot, because these guys, in the early Middle Ages in the monasteries, copied all the ancient books that were very often already at that time not really the original copies, or at least books that or or other scriptary supports of the classical age proper, but let's say they were all things that were copied and handed down through this multiplication in a way. Well, if there is a particular work of interest for history of literature, for instance, it's quite important and quite relevant, historically speaking, to find another copy of it, which maybe contains a different version of that work. When we read even the same medieval works, normally we study them from a normalized text, which is the result of a guy that, I don't know, in the 19th or 20th century put all the versions that he had from medieval manuscripts together, and from a philological point of view tried to to extrapolate what could be among these various versions the actual original work. And it's very fascinating here. As you understand, it's a more philological work than else, but obviously it requires paleographical skills, obviously to read manuscripts, or in codicological notions to understand, I don't know, which manuscript was written before or after. So it's these are disciplines that are really necessary for for understanding so much of our world and of our knowledge. And it's obvious that paleography is mostly a subject for medievalists because the Middle Ages produced a huge amount of manuscripts. You know, we have a really few remains, sometimes even just fragments from the ancient age. From the Middle Ages, we have a huge amount of documents that, by large, in spite of all the philological works that have been done in the last centuries, are still by large still unchecked, unstudied. They're still there in the libraries, and nobody in the bibliotheques. Nobody studied them properly. So it's a discipline that surely for who is interested in this form of work is definitely extremely um, convenient, meaning that if you have the luck especially to live in a place where you can access medieval manuscripts, um, you close yourself into the library and you can find amazing things. And think about, I don't know, our vernacular. You know, some informations about history of vernacular actually derive from certain notes or rhymes that have been written on manuscripts by chance by some copyists, for instance, that were maybe writing a manuscript in Latin in the High Middle Ages. They had heard a rhyme or a joke, and they, in vernacular, obviously, and they noted it on the margin of the manuscript, and very often those are some of the very first um, 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 exemplars of our vernacular languages, because vernacular did exist, but it wasn't already a library language, a language that had the dignity of a written form at the time. It's plenty of and even of influxes and of think about, I don't know, when the Norman French writing that was a Caroline writing, already switching quite markedly towards the Gothic forms. Gothic writing at the time was called Littera Moderna, not really Gothic, obviously, which means modern writing. And when the Normans conquered southern Italy, you find that they import that writing into southern Italy, for instance, wherein there were other writings, where it was the Longobarд writing or the Greek writing or even the Arab writing, such as in Sicily. And you can understand how these means of communications changed, how the typization of these writings actually hide not just informations about a certain historical period, but they also reflect the way those guys thought the world to be like. You know, if you read a medieval manuscript, from the writings, from the decoration, even from the size of the manuscript and how it's organized, you understand how the people of those times actually looked at the world. You know, in the forms of an insular Anglo-Saxon um, writing, you find, you know, the Anglo-Saxon world in that writing. If you read a Gothic writing, you find the universalistic minded and theological and look at the world, the world of universities, the world of knowledge as a divine construction. It's something extremely fascinating. So it's a subject that, for those who are keen on it, can really make you fall in love. I think either you love it or you hate it. I personally could never um, study this subject, become a paleographer proper, because I think that just going to find new manuscripts and to study them, in spite of the charm that it can have, it is still limiting. I'm one of those people who says we already know so much. It's beautiful to know new things, but let's say to know as much as we can synthetically about what we already know at large of the world. But definitely, if you like these smaller but still unknown fields of history, definitely paleography is a wonderful discipline, and I'm sure you would love it. It's obviously a discipline meant for medievalists, as I was saying before, mostly for medievalists at least. If you live in Western Europe, especially in countries like, I don't know, France, Italy, the UK, Germany, Spain, well, that's gonna be paradise for you, because you can access, especially in certain cities, take Paris or Rome, you can find or Florence. You have a huge amount of original medieval manuscripts that you can study. Obviously, if you live in Canada or in Australia, well, accessing a manuscript an original is a bit more difficult. So either you go studying in Europe for doing that, otherwise it's a bit difficult. Yes, it's true that there are many digitalization of these manuscripts, especially in the UK. There is, and in Germany too. That in German-speaking countries, especially, more in general, there is a better organization of in terms of preserving this material and putting them into catalogs and making digital copies of that. But a digital copy that you can watch and read everywhere is still, it doesn't really tell it all about a manuscript, because until you need just to read as a, let's say, as a basic paleographer, it's fine. You want to know what is written in a manuscript, you read it, and aside certain parts, certain parts of maybe of a page that went that deteriorated. I mean, more or less, you can find what is written in there. But having a manuscript in your hands is a wholly another experience. You can really look at how it's made. You can really make deeper analysis of it, even with some instruments with radiations to look if, I don't know, if the page was used with, if there is some other writing under the writing that you can see with naked eye. You can touch it, you can feel how it's done, how it's made up, what its consistency. It has a wholly different character if you really look at the book in your hands. If you're interested about this, I think it's a discipline that really gives you a lot of satisfactions. It's a discipline that can really make you happy. If you have it in your course of studies and you have no particular interest and you can't choose whether to study it or not, I don't know. I think it depends. As a medievalist, especially if you're a medievalist like me, my suggestion is study paleography because that's necessary. If you are a medievalist, you're gonna have a manuscripts in your hands sooner or later, independently from what you want to do. If you are not a medievalist, or you think that you're not gonna use paleography at all in your future, I don't know. That's still up to you. Decide whether it's worth it or not. I think it's fascinating, but I personally had problems with that, and they were quite, cynical problems. I had to pass an exam, so I didn't really consider it much from, an intellectual point of view. Um, um, if you wanna study it, remember that it requires a serious learning. It requires a lot of theory, but especially a lot of practice. It's a work that requires hours and hours spent on at least sheet of papers with copies of scans of manuscripts at least, and it requires really a lot of concentration and a lot of attention, and it's not easy. It's a very physical studying, if you want, because your eyes will get a lot of fatigue by doing it. But I'd say overall it's worth of the pain. It reveals you, at least I believe, a world that if you have done a normal school and you have no other particular, additional education, is really a novelty, and it can be of great interest to have a chance of learning it, even just for the sake of it. So this was a rather too long video. I stop it for now. I don't remember other things I could say, but if any of you is interested and wants to make questions about paleography, they will be welcome and I will try to answer you. So thanks for listening.